record on this computer. Sweet. Yay, welcome. This is our normal scheduled University Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee meeting, but it's a very different meeting because we have invited the campus community to join us and to discuss the Diversity Action Plan draft, which is very exciting. Ariel will be able to put in the chat in just a little bit direct links to the Diversity Action Plan draft, the feedback Google form if you would like to provide written feedback, and we'll be saving the chat. We'll be saving the chat from today, and then incorporating feedback in that way. Cool. Once again, we're recording and I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to start with just our basic presentation that we've been giving to a lot of folks. A little bit simplified though, so if you've heard it before, bear with me. Cool. So UDAC is comprised of the members here on the screen, a lot of which are here with us today. And I want to acknowledge that this work goes beyond just Ariel and I, which you might have been hearing from the most or getting the most emails from. We are just kind of trying to coordinate the things and organize the people. But so many voices have been included in this process. I specifically wanted to highlight newly added student representatives. Those are not the only student representatives, but we are, very excited to have them with us here. Forward. This is a wall of words, but basically what this is saying is that the board statement that was approved on April 21st, board statement on diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility, sets the large overarching values that are needed for us to then work towards justice, anti-racism, and inclusion at Western. Without those values, Western really hadn't made one solid statement on how do we feel about these things? What are our overarching values? So that was really pivotal to then now use this diversity action plan to put actual goals, actual items based on where we're at right now and where we need to be to meet the board statement values, right? So that's what this diversity action plan is. And if you'll notice in the draft, the diversity action plan speaks directly to the board statement, and we'll outline that in just a little bit as well. For those of you that like visuals, because I do, here's kind of how these things work. Not necessarily a hierarchy. Maybe Board of Trustees is kind of on the top, right? Because that is the highest level of statements or policy. Nothing can contradict that statement. But that Board of Trustees statement really just outlines the values. It's really top level. And then the Diversity Action Plan, along with the Cultural Competency Action Advisory Committee, sorry, those work alongside each other to actionize and to turn those values into actual goals. And then you might have been hearing about the DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force, which has been tasked to very quickly turn around budget proposals and figure out what our immediate funding needs are to hit as many of these goals and topics that are desperately needed right now. And so that's a very short timeline task force for hopefully implementing some change starting with the new fiscal year on July 1st. A little bit of a timeline to see where we've come from till today. Pre-2015, also known as pre-Dr. Fuller, the University Diversity Committee, as it was called back then, it's equivalent to UDAC now, they created a plan as well and a proposal for an executive director of equity and inclusion. That was all created in the 2015 timeframe. And, it didn't go a whole lot of places in that time. And so then we get to 2017 when the Oregon House passes the House Bill 2864, which calls for cultural competency training available to all employees of public institutions. Then in early 2019, UDAC is created, and that's when we begin drafting the Diversity Action Plan and doing a lot of work on that. Later in 2019, that's when our first draft of the Diversity Action Plan and like statement was created. That was reviewed by the Board of Trustees and then informed their drafting of the board statement of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. So you can see that there's kind of a circular thing going on there for a while. January 2020, the Cultural Competency Advisory Committee is created to work very focused on the cultural competency and how we're going to implement those trainings. And then we all know what happens after, well, shortly after January 2020. Don't want to talk about it. Early 2021, you should have seen a Diversity Action Plan survey sent out to faculty, staff, and students. And that's really for us to then, we had our first draft, right, in like early or late 2019. And then now we're ready to gather some more feedback from campus. And so we send out this survey and got amazing results from that. Then that Board of Trustees statement is passed in April. Now, what you're experiencing is this final feedback process on this Diversity Action Plan. Ultimately, we're leading up to the June 8th presentation to the Board of Trustees. That'll be some great time for questions from that level of the institution. There'll be some more edits after that date, but hopefully that's one of those final things. The feedback form that you have access to is going to be available through the end of the term. And so we wanted to give folks a chance to experience and participate in that Board of Trustees meeting. And then if something else comes up, from that meeting or discussions are generative in that way at the Board of Trustees meeting, you still have a chance to send in your written feedback and your thoughts via that Google form. And then UDAC will be taking a look at all of the feedback after finals week. Just a little bit about the survey responses, which I think are pretty cool. We had a total of 82 respondents, and we're estimating that about 50 of them are faculty and staff. It was an anonymous survey, but estimating about 50 of those are faculty staff based on when certain groups got emails about the survey, and about 32 student responses. And some big themes that may or may not be surprising to you came out of those survey responses. A huge call for cultural competency trainings, events, and then permanent and asynchronous access to resources and training type materials. Curriculum support and curriculum review, moving towards universal design and embedding diversity education in curriculum. Hiring came up a lot, and then physical space as well for a big thing that came up. So the Board of Trustees statement, if you haven't had a chance to review it, offers these 7 main topics through which we organize our values. And we wanted the Diversity Action Plan to speak directly to that Board of Trustees statement. And so you'll notice that we have mirrored those same 7 topics, but we've identified the goals that are specific to Western and right now underneath each one of those topics. A little bit of our current timeline. Like I said, we're building up to that June 8th board meeting, hoping for July to be implementing some budget decisions immediately to start getting stuff ready for fall. A little bit of a schedule. This is not comprehensive. This hasn't been updated with some recent additions, but we are meeting with all kinds of groups and all kinds of departments across campus to make sure that we're getting as many voices, present with our plan and making sure that, you know, our community is behind us and feels good about the language that we're using in the diversity action plan. So we're there today. Boom. So I wanted to keep that really short, that part really short. These are our emails of the co-chairs. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to reshare. And I was hoping that we could just go through. I'm not going to read the diversity action plan to us, but I wanted to share the screen and show you exactly how it's laid out so that when you review it on your own, you can kind of have that sense. And then I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion. We wanted that to be the main focus of today, and go from there. Just as a note, if you wanted to send direct questions to either me or Ariel Zimmer-Sewell, you can send those privately in the chat if you would prefer that method of asking questions or anything like that. So throwing that out there. Let's share this. Okay, so this is the draft. This is the Word document version, but same thing. You'll see that we've got our statement of purpose. We've got some definitions. These are similar to the definitions that are used in the board statement. There are some minor edits to the definitions from the board statement. Then we start getting into this section 3, and this is where goals happen. The main thing here is that we've included the board statement as the little intro section, I would call it. And then we've got the goals created by UDAC. And these are larger level. They might seem a little bit broader, a little bit vague. And that's to account for where we're going and who's doing this work to be able to find the best plan for Western at the time with the constraints, the resources constraints of the time. Okay, so we are going to fix this indent that's happening here because that's annoying. But recruitment and retention of employees is that second section there of goals. Recruitment and retention came up a lot in the diversity action plan survey. Professional development mainly and recruitment were the big ones there, as well as pay equity, items of pay equity. As far as recruitment and retention of students, this is a section very focused on student life and belonging, and supporting community building on campus with our student groups, as well as embedding diversity education in curriculum and new student orientations and our faculty engagement as well, and faculty and staff engagement. Curriculum and pedagogy talks about creating structures for our curriculum to be reviewed and or supported in its growth towards more diverse voices being represented in course content, the authors of textbooks, the accessibility of textbooks, all of that. Community partnerships really talks about what kind of resources are we providing for community organizations that support our students, or through jobs or internships or anything like that. How are we supporting those connections and those relationships with outside folks? And then who are we strategically asking to come onto campus for this, that, or the other thing? That could be vendors like that we're paying to come onto campus. Who are we paying? Kind of gets into business practices there, but it also could be job fairs. Like who are we inviting to job fair thing? It could be how are we encouraging our student, staff, and faculty to engage in local politics, and getting engaged in that way. Which the community partnerships and business practices get a lot of the similar language or like sentiments, but business practices talks about how does our business practices and our budget reflect our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so then there's some structures there that are already built that we can take advantage of, that we can choose vendors from, or at least solicit bids from vendors that are certified in certain ways. So facilities and physical plan talks about going above and beyond ADA requirements. It talks about multilingual signage being a massive topic that came out of the survey. Multilingual signage was just like a big one. That one came up a lot. And then providing physical space for the community building and the sense of belonging that we've talked about in earlier sections, and really being able to have our physical space reflect our commitment in those ways. Then we've got some appendices. The first one is a proposed timeline, or what this could look like in the next coming years. And we thought that this was useful because sometimes these things can really feel like that's nice. It's a bunch of nice language, but what's the actual plan to do it? And so we wanted to build some kind of timeline that, assuming that we're doing this is how we view these things moving forward. And assuming that this happens, then we imagine this happens. Then this section 5 here, this appendix B, is the big section where the UDAC committee has gathered all of the actual action items for each one of these goals. And these are all of our recommendations. This is obviously not going to be every single thing that could happen, and it's also not going to be all inclusive of everything that should happen, but it definitely gives whoever's doing this work a good outline that has been vetted by a lot of campus resources and key stakeholders on campus, a place to start and a place to figure out what's the most efficient way forward to getting as many of these needs met. Scrolling through, this is a big appendix. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that and let us have a conversation. I think that that's really what we're hoping for from today, is to get feedback. What are your initial thoughts? Let's go from there.
I just wanted to add that in the chat, you'll find a link to the draft as well as a link to written feedback. I imagine that with the volume of text there, you may want to take some time and give us feedback section by section in your own time. So please don't feel like if you can't think of something to say today that this is your only opportunity. That link will be open for feedback through Friday of the end of the term.
What are your questions? Or thoughts? We are also accepting compliments at this time.
Gabby,
Hi, Tina. Yes.
I thank you for the invitation to provide a compliment. I'm Tina Fuchs. I serve as the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students. And I want to commend UDAC for this work that you've done on this document. I was a previous member of the UDC, the University Diversity Committee, for about 8 years. I don't really know how long I was on that committee, but we did some of this similar work, but not to the level that this UDAC group has done. And I am so thankful to have this as a document that we can look at and provide feedback. And in particular, am really appreciative of some of the ideas of how you can implement some of these initiatives and a timeline, a suggested timeline for that. I understand that we can't do all of this all at once, but just really appreciate the organization of this draft plan and the ease in which it's readable and understandable. So just, yes, I wanted to provide you with a compliment. I don't really have a question at this time, and want to take some time to sift through all of this information before I offer more feedback. But just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Compliments are not required, they're just appreciated. And I'm just gonna put that out there. Like, there's been a lot of work put into this, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay.
So I want to echo that. Thanks, Tina, because this is exactly what our university needs. And it feels good that there is actually real movement here. And when I read the timeline, I get that you can't kind of lay this out without a director, because the director's priorities will guide this process. But I am curious about the financial commitment from the university and the sustainable financial commitment.
Absolutely, great question. And I think that Dr. Fuller would be best to talk about that. And I see that you're coming back, so I'm gonna let Dr. Fuller take that.
Yeah, two things. First of all, I echo what Tina said. This following the architecture of this board statement is a critical breakthrough, I think, in terms of the work that's being done. And Cabinet also had a chance to do a bit of a dialogue with the three tri-chairs that led to this current version that you're looking at. So there's been a lot of work done by a lot of players, most of whom are in UDAC, and also, as Tina pointed out, in UDC, which continued to meet from 2015 till UDAC was created with a slightly broader charge. And then Gabby rightly pointed out the fact that we have currently a DEI task force that consists of 3 members from UDAC, University Cultural Competency Advisory Committee, the House Bill 2864, to put a pin on that, and also 3 members from UBAC. In fact, we meet tomorrow to talk about proposals that could be funded in the coming fiscal year. To your point, Gay, what the board will see as part of its budget proposal is Dr. Kerman and I have identified up to $400,000 to get started with regard to fiscal year 22. So that becomes kind of the zone of interest. How we fund that will be complicated in year 1, but the idea is to have a full year that then can transition to base funding, as we do with many projects. So the way universities throughout my career have started things is sometimes you need almost like a pilot set of money to get things started, and then you base fund them going forward. So we have a zone of interest of up to 400,000. We'll look at the proposals. We'll decide where our greatest return will be, sort of the where to start. And that's why you see the action items that were attached to the proposal, as well as the timeline. So I think we are at a critical pivot point in these discussions, at least as I think about the time I've been here with you all since 2015. So that's where things are headed. That task force will identify the projects that we believe should be fully vetted, and then we're hoping UBAC can do an accelerated review of the ones that come out of tomorrow's meeting. So the idea is to take, X number and reduce it to whatever is the best ideas we think as a task force. And I say we, it's really they, because I'll be facilitating that meeting with these 9 participants. That was in the spring newsletter, if you want to go back and see who's on that committee. And then from that, UBAC will go through and say, we like the funding plan and we need to be thinking about base funding in fiscal year 23 and beyond. Like many things that happen in Oregon, and we almost think in terms of 2-year biennia, and we're also thinking 18 months out. And I think you know that well from all of your experience with regard to issues you've been involved in, Gay. I hope that's responsive. Be happy to follow up on any detail that may have confused folks. I see a thumbs up. I love that. Like Gabby, compliments are always appreciated. So, thank you. And I need to pivot to another meeting, so I'm glad I was here for that question. But I think this is an exciting development. I hope people really read it in earnest. I love the connection to the board statement. And again, thank you, especially to the tri-chairs, because I know they involved lots of folks in this, but right now we're trying to replicate what we did with the strategic plan back in 2016-17 by having some virtual town halls so that we can, get feedback. And that was challenging due to COVID and the lockdown that occurred, but I'm glad we're seeing things open up. And I might imagine that this could actually be one where you all meet face to face in fall to look at a final plan that would be going forward. But that's to be determined by those of you who are involved in this on a daily basis. So with that, Gabby, thanks for leading this. I'm going to pivot and I look forward to any further reports.
Thanks, Dr. Fuller. That was perfect. Awesome. What else? What other questions or comments do we have?
I wanted to add a comment about the proposed position. The title of the position is yet to be determined. It might be executive director. It could be chief diversity officer. That part has not been determined, but out of UBAC, or excuse me, out of UDIAC, our intention is to recommend a cabinet level position. In full disclosure, to hold administration accountable to these goals, values, and actions, and to ensure that at the decision-making table is a representative for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's very humbling to hear the amount of emotional labor that has gone into diversity initiatives at Western. And, the tri-chairs have heard what has happened in the past and wants to honor where it has been and taking that baton and carrying it forward. So, much respect to all of the former members of the diversity committee and all the work that they did. And it's our hope and intention to carry that forward and honor the work that's been done. And also just in general, staff and faculty who every day work for diversity and inclusion and don't often get thanked. Their labor is involved in, as well as student labor is involved in this proposal. So that's really important to say. And as a starting point, we're going to take the job description shared with us from the former diversity committee. And that's like our starting point, is we already have the work that they've done in the form of a job description. And then we can do our research to look at positions at comparable institutions. And, we have a lot of hope for what comes out of that process.
Thank you. Yeah, and then Gay, I see in the chat, your question is there a plan to develop real signage for campus to acknowledge and honor the land on which WOU sits? That's been a conversation that we've continually come back to, and that is definitely prominent within the diversity action plan. The action items there came out a lot in the survey responses. So it's definitely a priority as far as a for sure plan, not that I know of like where physical representations of land acknowledgements are going to go on campus. However, there is movement with developing agreed upon language for, say, syllabus statements or email signature statements. And that has been in conjunction with, what's Ken's last name? Ken starts with a C. Carano, thank you. Oops. Yeah, Ken Carano has been a major player in that, along with Jacqueline Carres-Hurley, our other co-chair, and they have been working with Grand Ron tribe to make sure that that statement is reflective of what needs there are for our local Indigenous populations. So that has been happening, and I think we're really close to having that solidified language to send out to campus to then use for some physical representation, at least in digital spaces. So there's some of that And yes, absolutely utilizing our amazing art department on campus is going to be some of that work moving forward as well.
And I think I encourage you to think creatively in your feedback. I think this is a window opportunity to give feedback to include what we want from the very beginning, because I think it's easier to include it now than to go back. And though, you know, of course, documents can be changed. It's kind of can be a pain in the butt. So, you know, I envision all sorts of ways that we can honor communities that are a part of our section of the Valley, our, you know, indigenous community. There's just so many things that we can do to infuse honoring culture. And please think outside the box, and we will read all of the feedback.
Thank you. What else?
I have a question/comment. I am very grateful that this new proposed position would be a cabinet level position, because I think, like you have so rightly pointed out, it's important that we have somebody who's in a position to hold our entire campus community accountable. I'm wondering what we as a campus community can do to support that person in that position. If we can kind of maybe think strategically about that a little bit, just because putting somebody there doesn't always ensure that they will be included and listened to and really heard in that decision-making process. And so are there things we can put into that report, or things that we as a campus community can start thinking about in order to ensure that that's not just a seat at the table, but that's a welcome position to be heard at the table?
Yes. Short answer, yes. And this is, you know, culture shift happens in our day-to-day interactions. And so I think us having conversations as much as possible about the need for cultural competency trainings, right? Like that's going to be one of the more like visible things, right? And so if you have control, right, if you're in a position of power in any way to give space to implement cultural competency trainings in some way within your department, within your student group, within student clubs. Sometimes that means giving up time that you would have spent on something else, but what are we working toward, like reevaluating our priorities, right? And so I think that number one, like an everyday thing, is that taking a look at where we can provide space for these things. The other thing is that your feedback through the Google form, while it is also written feedback and it could be on like line items or whatever, it's also supporting that this plan and these documents that we're passing along has been vetted by campus. So the evidence of your attention on the diversity action plan also speaks a lot. And I want to like acknowledge that it's not just like edit our words. It's more like, look at all of these responses, because we're going to be able to use that number of like, here's how many responses we got directly responding to the diversity action plan, along with the diversity action plan survey responses that we got earlier in the process. This has been a deeply vetted plan and has a whole lot of weight and value on our campus.
I think many staff and faculty are already doing this work and weaving in curriculum, you know, utilizing land acknowledgement statements and a variety of pieces that are included in the diversity action plan. So I want to make sure that we say that as well, as just because it's in the diversity action plan doesn't mean that it's not already happening. And one of the challenges is that it's hard to see all the things that are happening because there's not a person who's solely focused on gathering this information, being aware of it, using the work that's already being done as examples to share with other departments. So, and I also think that for decision makers who have some authority and have a voice that is more amplified, to ask the question in meetings, if this is truly a priority, how are we going to fund it? So I think that that's a really powerful question. And I think the mentality of show me the money is really important when it comes to diversity initiatives. I did want to address the question from as WOU Multicultural. So it reads, one of the proposals is also up for discussion is the Freedom Center for Students of Color. Is UDAC saying that this should be funded before the Center for Students and is the higher priority? So just a reminder that UDAC is comprised of students, staff, faculty, and administrators. And certainly that's not what we're saying. UDAC as a committee has been working on pushing for funding for this position since I've been a part of the committee, which is close to 2 years. And it's taken a lot of time for things to get to where they are now. There's language in the diversity plan that specifically calls for spaces such as the Freedom Center. So it's included in the diversity action plan, and at our next meeting, the next UDAC meeting, we'll specifically be discussing the Freedom Center and how UDAC can support that initiative. So the task force is going to be looking at multiple proposals, all tied to diversity, including the funding of a cabinet level position. So I think that there's many more steps involved, and UDAC welcomes, conversation about the Freedom Center together as a committee so we can better understand the specifics of the request and then support students further.
And I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, that these things are equally important. All of the things that we have asked for and are calling for in the diversity action plan are equally important. And in topics of privilege and oppression, when we start telling each other one thing is more important than the other, we are all losing. In the constraints that we currently have in the DEI task force, I believe there is room for many of the current very urgent needs right now. I believe there is room for everybody's needs to be met. Now we need to have conversations about it might look different than what had been originally imagined, but I believe that there are creative ways to solve these solutions together instead of making it a hierarchy in spaces that we're trying to break down hierarchies. I think that all of this is possible for this current budget conversation that we're having to implement on July 1st. I believe we have options. What are some other conversations here? One of the things that we run into with UDAC is that we are an advisory committee, right? And so that's something that we get reminded of sometimes, and that there are other units and there are other groups on campus that are actually making the decisions. And so we don't have final say as UDAC in other spaces, that's where the actual decisions are being made. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations with the representatives that are going to those spaces, and making sure that we're, getting as much information and input as possible, for sure. Shell, I saw your hand pop up. Go ahead.
Oh, it was just on that same topic about the DEI task force. I was curious whether are the proposals kind of following that structure the same way that you were describing earlier, that you've structured the plan itself, or I guess I'm just kind of curious to hear more about what the proposals are and whether they address all the different areas of the plan, or whether they're just kind of targeting a few specific areas.
Sure. So in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, so many acronyms, in the task force, what was decided to be done is to pull the previously submitted UBAC, University Budget and Advisory Committee, proposals, because that is one of those processes that anybody on campus can submit to. And that's something that COVID ruined, right? For the past, 2 sessions, right? So we started the 2021, they started it, and then it kind of got shut down, canceled, right? Because of COVID stuff. And so what we have access to, what we've been given access to on that committee, is the previously submitted UBAC proposals that specifically address diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So that's one set of proposals that we're looking at. And then the other set is the student needs proposal. And then the proposal that was originally created by the 2015 University Diversity Committee. So looking at that job description that was created and all of that. And then the recent proposal for we called it a Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Center, but that the same thing of that, what do we call it? Cabinet level position. So there's a number of different things. The committee is meeting tomorrow. The task force is meeting tomorrow. We've only met once prior to this week. And so we haven't really had a whole lot of conversation yet. This will be the first time we're meeting after getting access to all of those proposals and being able to kind of sit with those and see what combination of all of these things meets as many of the needs that we've outlined within the budget constraints that we've got.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on the plan too. I can give you more compliments.
Thanks. We're good.
And Gay, just to acknowledge your comment that affinity spaces are absolutely critical, and I think I can't speak for others, but I know amongst the chairs that this is we see that as well, and it's included in the language of the diversity action plan, and it was definitely a common theme as far as feedback from the survey that we took.
Well, and if I can say, one of the things that, I heard you, Gabby, saying that we have the ability to do a lot of work, and it shouldn't potentially be one person over the other where there's some kind of power dynamic, or one, if you will, group gets more. But I think what's really missing is an affinity space. And it's okay if, and I'm speaking from a white person's perspective, it's okay if white students go, but hey, what about me? Because that's why I put it in there. We have Werner, and we have health and wellness, and we have other spaces. And so it's not like they're not being considered. And I want to make sure that we find a way to help our students understand what it is we're trying to do when we create an affinity space, and that it's not reverse discrimination.
I definitely think that a main point in cultural competency trainings that will be forthcoming will definitely go over the fact that reverse discrimination does not exist. Absolutely. So got some other stuff in the chat. WOU's faculty, this is from Makana. WOU's faculty is about 80% white, and many of the other, quote, cultural committees are white individuals as well. Will UDAC be prioritizing a BIPOC individual for the Chief Diversity Officer position? UDAC will not be in charge of hiring whatever cabinet level position might be funded. So that's a larger thing that we're not going to be able to have full control over the hiring. However, UDAC will 100% be requesting specific time with candidates to have a time to ask all of the candidates for this position specific questions coming from UDAC and coming from, maybe from stakeholders that are passing along their questions that want to be asked of these candidates. Definitely the hiring committee and search advocacy trainings for hiring committees was a big theme in the survey responses. There's been some work on campus already just by individual departments that are willing to put the resources and the time into getting their staff trained in search advocacy. But we're looking into ways to make that a little bit more instituted across the board and a little bit more equitably distributed with hiring committees. So that's some of the work and some of the goals that we specifically called for as far as hiring goes.
I might also use this as an opportunity to clarify what a search advocate is for those who are not familiar. So a search advocate is a volunteer staff or faculty member who's been trained to ideally be involved in a hiring process from the beginning, meaning from the time that a job description is created to be more inclusive in how the job description is created and open up the language of the job description to include more applicants. So that doesn't always happen, but we're wanting to see that happen from the beginning. So I think that this position in particular provides a very special opportunity for a search advocate to be involved from the very beginning, from the creation of the job description. So I don't know the HR policies around how positions can legally be advertised around seeking a BIPOC applicant, but there is control over, how and where we advertise. So these are things I don't know. So I don't want to speak about something that I'm not versed in, but my hope is to see a search advocate involved and to find ways to expand the applicant pool as much as possible. And then, I think that the challenge of having a predominantly white staff is real. And I think that it's something that a lot of us are aware of. And when I'm in meetings, I try to say, we need to acknowledge that not everyone is at the table. And so I don't have an answer to that. In all humility and honesty, I don't have an answer to that right now, but I think that it's something that Western and all of us here who want to see things change, we need to contend with that, own it, and push for more inclusive conversations and decision making.
What are some other questions here? We're getting towards the end of our time, so we probably have enough time for one question if everyone's been waiting on a question. Then we'll do that.
Also to acknowledge, my hope is now, we do have students involved, student representatives involved in UDIAC, and several of them are new on the committee. And so my hope is that we continue to strengthen the student voice in UDIAC and, keep these conversations going in our committee and on campus. I don't know if we can't make promises or commit to things that are still in process. So I strongly encourage students who are in the committee and are leaders on campus to keep the conversation going, keep holding us accountable, and then we can have these conversations at our next UDIAC meeting as well.
Thanks, Z. I don't know why I thought this stopped at 11:30. So if people still want, I don't know. I saw 30. I don't know. Who knows? One of those days. Thank you, Z. More questions. Let's go. Yeah, okay.
So just to be clear, it seems like there's not a position description yet for a director. But the plan is to possibly hire somebody in fall. Is that what I think I read?
So yes and no. There's a drafted position description. The thing that is unknown right now is that there's multiple titles which are then attached to HR data on what their pay grade is and all this kind of stuff based on what kind of title they have, right? Like HR things. And so in one version of all of this work, it's been called the Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion. And one version, it's called the Chief Diversity Officer, which is my least favorite. Just putting that out there. That's my opinion. It's my least favorite. But then there's like another one where we're like something else, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So like the name has not been decided upon. Right. So as far as job description, we've got some like already created information on like job responsibility things that might need to be added to a little bit, and then added in some of those like specific language of tasks, especially some of the like cultural competency oversight type of language in there as well.
The current job description we have is actually what was shared with us and designed by the previous diversity committee. So it's not to say that it's not relevant. It's all still relevant, but it's from honestly 5 years ago. So here is where we have an opportunity to be really thoughtful about how we want to recruit for this position, and also how does the House bill, how does that work with this position? So there's more questions than answered, but I think because of the push from the cultural competency bill, and now that we're working on developing this position, we have the opportunity to shape the job description, taking what the university has from the past, the job description from the past, and bring it current. So that's really exciting. I think that we don't have something gelled is actually a good thing, because so many things have been in process and moving.
But the plan is to hire.
I mean, it hasn't been officially, like that is what the call is for. Yes,
Okay.
is to hire somebody. Yes, but that again, that is the task force decision. Z, should I address Makana's first and then you, or what makes sense?
Whatever you would like to do.
Okay, go ahead. Makana says you first.
Okay, so I don't necessarily, can you all hear me? I have my mask on, so, okay, perfect. I was wondering if I could possibly just make a comment instead of a question, if that is okay. All right, perfect. So I think what I mainly just want to, from a student perspective, as mentioned by, I believe, Makana within the comments, the Cultural Diversity Center that is now known as the Freedom Center has been something that has been in the works for over a decade. And I am concerned that in this meeting, we are speaking about a single individual. And I want to make it explicitly clear that it is very accurate that 80% of our faculty is white. And it is extremely difficult to be, I am not just Black, I am Hispanic, and I'm also Native Alaskan. I am one of the most oppressed groups within our society. And I cannot tell you how painful it is to continue to learn in environments where teachers are explicitly racist, let alone walking across campus, just trying to go to the library and seeing Confederate flags drive by you. And I have no place to go. I have no place to go because there are minimal people that look like me. The Freedom Center that we are trying to advocate for, that also within this meeting that we are talking about, where we could have a director of diversity and equity. I'm still a little bit confused on the title, but the purpose is like the individual that would be in charge of what this action plan wants to come out of it. We cannot put that burden on a single person to make the change that we are all hoping for. It is about students. It is about students that look like me, that can have a safe place to go, but also be the change. Students have the voice to make change. I will be graduating next year, and the change that I've made on this campus is unconscionable, truly. I have done so much on this campus as a single person, but imagine hundreds more. We deserve to have a place on campus where we feel safe, that I can go after I see a Confederate flag and I don't feel safe on campus. I want to go somewhere where I can be safe and where that individual will be. So what I am asking is, I understand the purpose of this action plan, but I am leaving this campus where I feel like we're still in like the same place, where we still don't have a place for students of color to go after about 15 years. And other colleges in Oregon already have this. Like, why are we so behind? But more importantly, we should not be talking about this and putting the burden that we're all speaking on a single individual. And so obviously I'm a little bit frustrated, but I just really wanted to put that out, that from a student standpoint, a single individual isn't going to change this. We can make a little bit of change, but it's going to take more than that. And so we're just hoping that we can like work together to have a center where this individual can be, and where we can all work together in order for change to actually be made. A single person isn't going to solve all of the issues on this university and on this campus. It's going to be a collective whole. And again, white individuals cannot continue to be making decisions on behalf of students, staff, and faculty of color. It has to be us that has the input.
Thank you. And the diversity action plan and the conversations within the task force are in a lot of alignment with you about not a single position. This can't, and that's why I was saying that the like title, or like the chief diversity officer title, is my least favorite, because that implies a single person. And so yes, Z, 100%, that this idea to have some island of an office that's like, oh, that's their job. Oh, nope, that's this one person's job. 100%, none of the research supports that that is effective, that it is beep, 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 beep. Long lasting is the word that I'm trying to find, but it was a cooler word, but it's gone. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work long term to have one person. And the tough balance that we're going to have to find is that sustainable. Thank you, everyone. Sustainable. Yeah. The keep going. Not sustainable to hire just one person to be off on an island. But there also needs to be some kind of way to hold the administration accountable, and to be able to engage critically with the administration. So no one's asking for a one position only. Everyone is asking for a position, and there's always and. That is all of the conversation that I have been a part of, at least, and speaking from my own experience here, within all the things that I have the privilege to be a part of. It is always an and conversation. And absolutely finding space, physical space, to have our commitments reflected in our physical space is a priority in those rooms where it matters as well. It's happening. It's just happening so much slower than any of us want it to be, but it's happening.
I think one thing that kind of held the conversation from moving forward was it's like you know, two sides of the same coin. No, it can't just be one person, but also if we don't have someone who's instituted to be that sustainable leader, then as students cycle through the institution, and even as committee members cycle through the diversity committee, that work, unfortunately, it doesn't get lost entirely, but it can lose momentum. So there needs to be a pillar, or I like to see it like a conductor, or someone that's holding all the strings. Or I think that the work can lose its potency. You know, I would like to know that, you know, my involvement in diversity initiatives doesn't get lost if I accept a position at another institution. And I think, you know, as a former student leader, you know, though I'm not a student anymore, there's a lot, you know, if you graduate, then what happens to the work? So I think it's not a one or the other, but it's holding both of those things together in both hands, that it's not just one person, and we want to make sure that the work keeps going, and that someone is holding all the pieces together at the same time.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to address a couple things coming up in the chat. First, since it's with this topic, Z put in the chat, we shouldn't be fighting over money for a single individual or a safe place for students of color. Feels invalidating as a student of color that we can't even give students of color a safe space. How can we claim Black Lives Matter of any BIPOC life matters if we can't invest in the retention of students of color? 100%. Again, all of the conversations that I'm a part of are and. It's not this or. With the current funding that we are working with and the proposals we are working with, all of this can happen right now. There is space for everyone at the table. We're gonna figure it out. We are going to figure it out. It might mean that some things have to change in, you know, what we're envisioning for right now, but I believe that there is room for this and conversation. Really quick, and then Makana will follow up. An earlier comment from Makana before we heard from Z was the diversity action plan is a board statement. Correct? Question mark. Besides the chief diversity officer, what other action is planned to take place after this statement is released? The diversity action plan is not a board statement. 100% no. Absolutely not. It is an advisory committee plan. This is our recommendation. We are an advisory committee to the president. The president is the one that approves the diversity action plan of like, yes, this is the goals. The board statement is the only thing that's like policy, like boom, this is the thing, we have these values. And that's why it's so broad, right? Because they're not going to tell us how to do our job or how to meet those goals. We get to decide that through our advisory committees. But 100%, it is not policy. We are not a policy committee. That's not that. So I want that to be super, super clear. And I know that that's something that a lot of folks are confused about. So I wanted that to be super, super clear that it is not a board statement. The only board statement is that board statement on diversity, inclusion, accessibility, that we are like speaking to in the diversity action plan. But that's about it. So go ahead, Makana, on that.
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's here. I am a new member of UDAC, so to see people come out and learn more about this action plan is really cool. I just wanted to mention as well, yes, that can be really confusing for us to kind of know what's really going on. And even as a member of UDAC, I really have tried to read everything. But I just wanted to mention too, students this year, I don't know if you could tell, but we're really frustrated and we're really tired of all of the things that we are going through. And I think people of color have gone through not more than we have in the past, but a lot all at once in this past year. COVID has affected us even worse than others and has made it really difficult for us to be healthy. I had COVID for 5 weeks and my partner almost passed away. So it's a lot to deal with, especially with discrimination and racism just kind of everywhere. So students are wanting to support this. We want to have those spaces. We want to do those things. I just wanted to clarify that I'm glad to be part of these conversations and that's why I have so many questions, but also because I know a lot of the wonderful individuals in this call and you all kind of know me and what I'm about. And the students that are also here are the most amazing students I've ever worked with in my entire life. And we will never stop. So students of color deserve a space and we'll continue to fight for that. I just think at this point, we feel like it's really unfair that we then have to go up against people who have more access to these processes and systems to ask for money that we don't get. And that's why it's taken 15 years for us to get to this point, because students graduate, they get tired, they get burnt out, they get exhausted by the red tape, just as UDAC does. So I guess I'm hoping that beyond just adding more students to the committee, we actually are listening to what students need. And I think sometimes this university forgets that we're here for us. We're here so that students can get an education. And I think that gets lost really quickly sometimes when all of this other stuff starts happening. So I hope that our priorities can be on students and that our university can understand that students of color are leaving. I think it was like 10% of the freshman class said they don't want to come back. We've had so many students just leave because they don't feel safe. And we don't want to keep seeing that happen. So I'm hoping that in these conversations that we're having, in these open forums, that people can see that students are still here and we're wanting our voices heard in these processes. And the more we get pushed out, or the more we get told, you don't really understand all the process, or maybe you should come a little later, or let us do this first and then we can work on your thing. It does start to feel like an or versus an and. And it shouldn't just be 5 of us in every meeting trying to say the same things over and over and no one listening to us. So I just wanted to clarify like why I was asking so many questions and why students like Z are here and how we feel overall is let down, and we're almost out of hope at this point.
Thank you. And I think that your questions and comments are important and wanted in this space. That's what this space is for. So thank you for that. Gay.
So I've been here for 18 years and this institution moves incredibly slowly. And it's frustrating to several of us as well as faculty. And I know that faculty of color don't feel supported. And now I'm going to speak about my colleague, Doris Cancel-Terrado, because she gets appointed by the president as a woman of color. And she's simply amazing, right? So I'm glad she's on this committee, but I know that faculty of color have to be feeling the same way. And I watch it as one of their colleagues. And, you know, I'm white, so I fit into the majority. But I think what I want to say is that, yeah, students, you will be moving on. But I think there are many faculty who are white who are absolutely committed to this and have pushed in the past and been pushed back on. And now it feels like this is real and there's real movement for the first time in 18 years. So I'm going to hold out hope. Because I guess maybe I get to, because I'm in that privileged position of being faculty. But it's not going to, so I get that piece of where I sit, but this feels different than it ever has. And so as you move on, your efforts don't go unnoticed, unacknowledged, and are super, super appreciated because of the power that you have shown and your resilience. I really appreciate it, because otherwise, no, we wouldn't be doing this, I don't think.
Thank you. Melissa?
I'm not sure if this is the right time or if I should bring this up at another time, but just I was curious about the language chosen around ability and disability and focusing on ability. And I just wanted to kind of process that a little bit. I mean, there is some reclaim in the disability culture around disability identity. And so while I appreciate the positive focus on folks' abilities, I'm just wondering, like, if there was some outreach to folks for representation on that particular language that was chosen. And it's a catch-22. It's as language does, as it evolves, it will not speak to all, and I don't want to exclude it, you know, so, and we might not be able to capture like where everyone lies on that, but I was just curious around that particular chosen language around ability.
And are you referring to in the definitions with accessibility?
Yeah, I'm looking like at number, I think it's like, it's spelled out under 2.7 specifically around underserved and underrepresented.
Oh yeah, so like
underrepresented. It just talks about, you know, the example there, the capture there is physical or cognitive ability.
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just screen
Yeah,
sharing
you're
so that we can all see. Yeah, so this language was directly from the Board of Trustees definitions.
I had some conversations there too. Okay.
Cool. I'm happy to we made some edits. This was just not one that got caught by anybody in the previous meetings.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk. Let's talk about better language here.
Sure. I don't even necessarily know what's better. I think we just might want to also include disability identity, because it does, I think the focusing on the ability is very much the capture of some folks. And I think focusing on disability identity is the capture for others. So if there's a way that we can incorporate both, I think that may address that particular thing.
And do we so this is me showing my nerd a little bit, but do we like the dis in parentheses? Where are we at with the dis in parentheses?
Boy, you know, one person can't represent all the things. I think that let's keep talking about that. I'm doing an all call to our team and bringing attention to that. I'd be happy to put it on our listserv. I'd be happy to send something to the students who choose to be registered for their office. I mean, I think there's ways that we can try to incorporate some of that capture. You know, as with language, identifying with any particular group, there will be variety and diversity within their own identity and their preferences. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're kind of trying to make sure that everybody feels like that they can see themselves in that particular information.
Absolutely. That's exactly why we wanted this many people to look at it.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm just noticing some inconsistencies under the cultural competence language too, just as we're talking. So I'm just highlighting stuff. This is perfect.
Yeah, and we can keep working on that. It's not perfect and it changes over time as language does. And so, yeah, I think, and then the team, the part around, I mean, I'll give you additional feedback if you want me to in the writing, because I know that's sometimes helpful too, but you know, it's beyond code. people use accessibility around code responsibility, which is like, if you were to lay the bar on the floor, I guess that's the bar. But code is required for permit reasons. Like, let's go beyond code. Let's talk about actual accessibility and the various kind of components of that.
Absolutely.
I'm really glad you brought that up. And I hope that, you know, others will hold this document to task and give us very specific feedback. So thank you for that. And I know that I've been a part of conversations with the term underrepresented as well. Like, these terms matter, and so please give us all the feedback.
Yeah, and I'll look at that as well, because I think that some of the accessibility component, like Shell's been and her team's been working really close with our team around an equitable opportunity to accessibility. It doesn't mean I request it and I get it 2 weeks later. It's that I am able to engage it at the same time in the same needs as others. And so that's something that, you know, those are my life goals, right? Put our whole entire department out of a job. That's my life goal.
What else? Yeah, Gay.
Sorry, I just can't help myself.
It's okay.
But I think the thing that's coming up for me too is not like pretending that we can be neutral when we need to be anti-phobic, anti all this. And so there's language, you know, in this document, and I think the piece for me is around action. I get really irritated when, and this is what I said the other day in a meeting about, I've always felt like the rhetoric around being Hispanic serving institution is disingenuous as hell. It is just, and I've been pretty vocal about that, and I'm sure that Rex was not happy, but whatever. So this is the piece that I worry about the most. And yes, hiring somebody will help, having an affinity space will help. But for God's sake, can we not allow Joey Gibson on our campus ever again if he ever gets out of jail? I hope he's in jail, right? I mean, it's that kind of stuff too. Or as, now I can't remember, Z, I think you were the one who said it, something about seeing a Confederate flag. We are in an area that was white supremacist, right? Dallas, Oregon. That hasn't really, it's changed because they all moved to like Oregon City, but it hasn't. So I don't know how we bring other people in, or the community into this broader conversation when, for example, I'm rambling, but I'll get to my point. Like the Clemens Foundation or the Clemens family in Philomath used to offer a scholarship, fully paid scholarship for students who went to Oregon State. They don't do that anymore. You had to be a graduate from Philomath High to get that. And you can still get it if you don't go to Oregon State, because they see Oregon State as one of those liberal institutions just gonna mess with our students. So this is the context within which we work and live. And I'm struggling with how we become anti-phobic, anti-racist, anti-sexist, etc. On this campus. And you know, I don't care about free speech. I mean, I do, but I don't, because Joey Gibson should never have been allowed on this campus. So I don't know what to do with this. So I'm just putting it out there.
I want to say that, like, if I can take off my hat as a co-chair and just say personally, I would like to see a Chicon X studies program at Western. I would like to see a cultural, either a cultural center or a place on campus that officially recognizes the contribution of agricultural workers in the Central Valley. This is not necessarily part of my identity, but it's something that I feel very deeply, because this valley is what it is because of the work that's been put into it. I don't know. I've been part of Western for 3 years, and I feel like if Western can chart a course towards in and of itself being a center of culture here, then and by example, like living by example, then that begins to transform the community. And it will have a positive influence on Dallas. I live in Dallas. So the more that Western can be an example of anti-racist, can be an example of cultural expression, can be an example of ethnic studies programs here, it will positively affect the community.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So one of the things I'm now chair of the Division of Health and Exercise Science. And if you haven't had a chance to interact with our health faculty, they are just truly amazing people. And of course, you can't be a public health faculty member and not be concerned about health equity and all of the layers that surround equity that fall into health equity as well. And I'm probably saying something that I shouldn't, but I'm going to. We are trying to have conversations, and this is 5 years out probably, but having something like a Center of Health Equity or Center for Health Equity. I don't know if it will happen. We have to get enough students and enough support externally to do all the things just like they did for the Center for Restorative Justice. But we have a definite commitment to recognizing, and our faculty have worked and do research around some of the migrant labor work. And I know it was shut down. We had a faculty member who is no longer here who actually proposed doing some work and having a center for migrant health or something like that several years ago, and that was totally shut down. So I think we can chart a different course in that region too.
Thank you. What else? We are actually getting towards the end of our time this time. So any final comments? I think that this has been a really useful and necessary conversation that we've had today. And the goals moving forward are to make sure that we have consistent and sustainable practices in relation to anti-racism, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And to Z's point in the chat, that our Native American Lounge is a closet in the APSC building. That's exactly the kind of things that we're wanting to avoid with whatever decisions are coming here soon. We want to make sure, like Makana and Z were talking about, that we want to make sure that there are specific spaces, yes, and leadership that is able and focused on supporting our students utilizing those spaces and needing those spaces. So making sure that we're making sustainable decisions that are going to work long term that aren't going to be forgotten about, like the Native American lounge is what I'm referring to there, that gets overlooked or forgotten about or doesn't get used. There are absolutely different ways that can be more sustainable in that way. I really appreciate everyone being here for this conversation. Again, we are recording this, so I will get that processed and then be able to get that out for campus access. You can also find links to the diversity action plan, the form to give feedback, either in that email. You can email either me or Ariel. It's also on the main page of our website, wou.edu/diversity. Oh, Ariel, you're so good. We are also going to be working with ODS to make sure that this video is captioned. And then it will be going out to campus. I thought it, didn't say it. Now I'm saying it. That will happen. Yeah, please give us some feedback in whatever way works best for you, really. Like we just want the feedback. So if there's a different way that works better for you, then we're up for it. We're here for it. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here.